If you live in Sri Lanka, let's be real. You know that feeling. You open your electricity bill and just brace for impact. It's this constant, painful problem that just doesn't seem to go away. So today, we're going to dig in and figure out exactly why your power bill just keeps going up.
And just when you thought things might be settling down, well, get ready because another jolt is right around the corner. Let's look at the latest news that has everybody worried.
There it is, 11.57%. Yep, you're seeing that right. That is the proposed electricity tariff hike for early 2026. So after a little bit of a break with some cuts and changes, it looks like we're headed right back up that mountain again.
So what's the official story? Well, the Ceylon Electricity Board, the CEB, is saying they need this hike to cover a massive projected revenue gap. We're talking 13.1 billion rupees. The argument is this is just what it costs to make and deliver power, and someone has to pay for it.
But here's the thing, right? This doesn't feel like a one-off event. It feels like we've seen this movie before. It's a pattern. And that brings us to the big question we're trying to answer in this explainer. Why does this cycle of price hikes keep happening over and over again in Sri Lanka?
To really get what's happening now, we've got to look back a little bit. Because the last few years, they've been a total roller coaster for everyone, with prices just swinging like crazy in every direction.
And this timeline, man, it really shows you just how wild it's been. It ticks off in August 2022 with a jaw-dropping 75% hike, the first big one in almost a decade. Then, boom, another 66% surge just a few months later. Okay, so then we get a little bit of release in 2024 with some decent cuts, but that yo-yo effect just keeps going with an 18% increase in 2025, which brings us right to the new hike being proposed for 2026. It's just been completely unstable for family budgets, for businesses, for everyone. So what's the big takeaway here? It's pretty simple. Even with those moments of relief, the overall direction is crystal clear. The huge increases have totally wiped out any of the reductions, which means the new normal for your electricity bill is way, way higher than it was just a few years ago.
So who's pulling the strings here? What forces are actually behind these decisions? Well, that brings us to two really big players, the state-owned CEB and, you guessed it, the International Monetary Fund, or IMF. And their policies, they are very, very connected.
So the CEB pretty much frames these hikes as a matter of survival. Their official line is that this is all for financial and operational stability. In other words, they're saying this is what they have to do to make sure the lights actually stay on for everybody. But there's another massive number that's quietly influencing all of this. $3 billion. That's the size of the bailout package Sri Lanka got from the IMF to get through its economic crisis. And you know what? That money came with some very, very strict rules attached.
And one of the biggest, most important rules is something called cost-reflective pricing. So what on earth is that? Basically, it's the IMF saying the price you pay for electricity has to match what it actually costs to produce it. And that means no more government subsidies that kept prices low but were causing the CEB to lose incredible amounts of money.
And the conditions, they're not messing around. They are super specific. The IMF is mandating an end to subsidies, a system for automatic and regular tariff changes, and price reviews every single quarter. The bottom line is really simple. If Sri Lanka doesn't meet these conditions, the next chunk of that $3 billion bailout, well, it doesn't get released. But here's the thing. The IMF's rules, they're only part of the story. What they really do is shine a spotlight on a much deeper, more fundamental problem in Sri Lanka's energy system. And that leads us to a real paradox.
This question is really at the heart of everything. You look at Sri Lanka, a country that is just blessed with natural resources, tons of sunshine, plenty of wind, powerful rivers. So why in the world is the actual cost of making power so stubbornly high?
This chart, wow, it tells you so much. The average cost for 1 kilowatt hour of power that's made from imported oil is an incredible 120 rupees. Coal is a bit better, but still a hefty 50 rupees. These are just insanely expensive ways to make electricity, and they're completely tied to the whims of global markets. So let's see how that plays out in the country's energy mix. Okay, so hydropower is doing some real heavy lifting, providing a solid 35%. But a whopping 60% of Sri Lanka's electricity comes from burning those pricey imported fossil fuels. And only this tiny little sliver comes from other renewables like solar and wind, even though the potential is absolutely massive. So why? Why are we stuck in this fossil fuel trap? Well, it's a whole mess of things, really. We're talking about years of bad policy decisions and endless delays on renewable energy projects. The national power grid itself is old and struggles to handle more green energy. And then you throw in things like allegations of corruption in buying fuel, and the fact that rooftop solar is just too expensive for most people. And yeah, the problem just gets worse.
Okay, so we've talked about billions of rupees, IMF conditions, and energy charts. But what does all of this actually mean? What does it feel like for the average person? Let's bring this back down to the very real human side of this story.
And this right here, this is maybe the toughest part of this whole situation. Experts are now warning that things are so bad that families are being forced into making choices you wouldn't wish on anyone. They're using risky coping strategies, which is a clinical way of saying they're cutting back on food, just to be able to pay the light bill.
And this damage doesn't stop at the front door of a home. This isn't just a social crisis, it's a huge economic one. When energy costs keep rising, it makes it harder for businesses to survive, let alone grow. And that threatens to slow down the entire country's fragile economic recovery. So, at the end of the day, we're left with this one critical question. The current path, the one that depends on imported fuel and these painful price hikes, it's causing real hardship. The other path requires a huge, urgent shift to Sri Lanka's own renewable resources. So can the country finally break this vicious cycle? Or is its future and the well-being of its people going to be forever chained to the volatile price of fuel on the world market?